From my early youth, since before I was 20, until the present time when I am over 50, I have recklessly launched out into the midst of ocean depths. I have ever bravely embarked on the open sea, throwing aside all craven caution. I have poked into every dark recess. I have made an assault on every problem. I have plunged into every abyss. I have scrutinized every creed of every sect. I have tried to lay bare the innermost doctrines of every community. All of this have I done that I might distinguish between true and false, between sound tradition and heretical innovation.
We come into this world and we leave it. That much is certain, I think. It's this road we're traveling on that we need to figure out. But then knowledge is like the horizon. It recedes as we approach it, so there is always the need to know more. From Malibu to Mecca, and now Mashhad, I've been seeking my answers from philosophy and religion, and turned to the teachings of Islam. It may not seem an obvious choice, especially if you buy into that clash of civilizations scenario. But then with so much happening in the world today, things that I've taken for granted are being called into question. How can I get to the bottom of it? Years before, I'd come across the writings of a man who'd lived nearly 1,000 years ago, but whose teachings resonated within me. He exerted a tremendous influence on thinkers in the East and the West, Muslim and non-Muslim alike. His life was devoted to probing the mysteries of existence, and by overcoming his own philosophical doubts and achieving spiritual illumination, he became a model for seekers of the truth everywhere. His name was Al Ghazali, and that's why I've embarked on this journey, to find out more about his life and his quest for ultimate reality.
Al Ghazali is generally regarded as one of the 5 or 6 most influential thinkers in the history of humanity. And his great message for posterity, and probably the main reason why he's so subsequently revered, is that he shows that at the living heart of every belief and every practice of Islam, there is a spiritual purpose and a process of repentance and upliftment and transformation. That's why he's called Proof of Islam. No one else quite has that title.
It is here in Tus, Khorasan, in northeastern Iran, that the journey begins. It was in writings like The Revival of Religious Sciences and The Alchemy of Happiness that he indicated the inner meanings of the Islamic rites and the methods that led to his realization. But that spiritual alchemy, like the alchemy that transmutes base metals into gold, is not so easily discovered. We are enjoined to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave, and reflecting upon death certainly helps to focus our thoughts on where we're ultimately heading. But with the distractions of the world pulling us in so many directions, it's easy enough to lose sight of what we should be preparing for.
The second type of knowledge that he identified was rational knowledge, the mathematical knowledge. And this is questioning a priori assumptions. What he realized was that just as he had discovered that the sensoria were not infallible sources of knowledge, that the intellect could also be in a diluted state, that we could actually think something to be true and have reasoned it out, but in fact, it wasn't. And he felt very comfortable with mathematics because he said, whether we're awake or asleep, 2 + 2 will always equal 4.
In our dreams, we are certain that what we see is real. Yet when we awake, we know that what we took to be an unquestionable fact was in fact illusion. So what proof can theology or philosophy give us to guarantee that our senses aren't also deceiving us?
Despite all the knowledge I had acquired, I still couldn't resolve this simple and fundamental problem. A battle was raging between my heart and my head, and I eventually became physically ill. It was a bewildering time.
In his time, confusion was reigning. Confusion was was everywhere. And I think most of us would agree in the modern world that we are living in very confusing times, difficult times, times that everything is being questioned, and nobody really can see a clear light. And I think that he was in these times, and that's why he's so extraordinary.
So how can we reconcile faith with reason? It's become a luxury to practice religion unquestioningly in the modern world. On the one hand, there is cynicism and no absolutes. On the other hand, rage is mistaken for revelation, and religion in its various persuasions hijacked by radical ideologies, allowing atrocities to be committed in its name. Why is it, how is it, that religion meant to be a means to salvation has become so unappealing? How has the profane become so seductive, so that we no longer are aware of the unseen, or are able to accept that there may be a higher purpose to life? The world has always been fraught with dangers, and as Ghazali said, you only really possess what you can't lose in a shipwreck. So do we spend our entire lives watching from the shore, or despite the dangers venture out in search of a deeper knowledge, one that isn't to be found in books alone?
Imam Al Ghazali recognized that there were basically 4 types of knowledge. The first type of knowledge was sensory knowledge, knowledge of the sensoria, that we had this ability to perceive whether it was hot or cold. We could look and see that it was day as opposed to nighttime. But he examined this and recognized that it wasn't true, that a man, a feverish man, would think it was hot when in fact it was cold. We can't deny the knowledge of the senses, but he recognized that the knowledge was not infallible, that the knowledge was something that we could be deluded into thinking, in fact, something, and it was. We are living in a time like his time, when religion had become stale, religion had become didactic, religion had become a dry practice of argumentation, dialectic debate amongst students. Imam Al Ghazali, I think, of all of his achievements, and we can see this in his own autobiography, one of the things that he really set out to do was end argumentation for argumentation's sake. He really recognized the spiritual pathology of the desire of the ego and the self to overcome one's opponent. And he wanted to get back to something much deeper, which is not that I am entrenched in my personal opinion, agenda, political position, and I have no recognition of my opponent, but to recognize that my opponent and myself must together be in search of the truth. And if the two of us are in search of the truth, we can speak. But if we are in search of self-aggrandizement, if we're in search of some ego-stimulating experience, of overpowering my debater, then we come to nothing. And because he was a man that could win any debate, he knew how important it was that the ego must be set aside in order for that debate to come to some kind of fruition. He came to a realization that all of this intellectual knowledge was in fact a very, very well camouflaged ignorance, because he was ignorant of the most important thing, which was himself. One of the things about the mystic path, or about this direct experience of reality, is that for Imam Al Ghazali, it is science. Because at the root of science, and this was well known in the Muslim world during his lifetime, which came much later from the Muslims to the West, at the root of science is the ability to replicate the experiment. If the experiment can be replicated, then we can get scientific results. He wanted to find out, does this indeed, these experiences that others have claimed, if I set out on this path, and he was an experimental scientist, if I set out on this path, can I replicate that journey? And he did it. And that's how he came to a certainty of it.